Okay, with Andre Joseph, Dismissal Time is the short film. It's 29 minutes long. It is from the political festival. A black high school student at a prep school becomes a victim of cyberbullying. I was reading your blog interview. This seems like a pretty personal film for you. This happened to you when you were in high school?
Yeah, long story short, I went to high school in Staten Island, New York, in my freshman year, where I was one of the few black students on that particular side of the island. And there was a particular incident in which there was a girl that I was interested in. Her friends around her, for whatever reason, were not fans of me, and somebody had
Well, I think we,
told.
we know the reason, but go ahead.
Yeah, essentially, I got set up for something that I didn't do, and the school tried to basically do an investigation. Then they decided, well, maybe he didn't do anything. We'll just make an announcement, and we'll exonerate him. But they never made the announcement, and I was disgusted by that. They just swept it under the rug, and I held it to myself for a very long time until all the protests that happened a couple of years ago, and it was during the lockdowns, and I felt like I needed to say something. I needed to tell my story, and I spent that lockdown writing this script and then a year trying to fundraise and put it all together into this short film that we have now.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. And what was your experience making films before this film?
Up until that point, I mean, I had done three features. My first movie was Priceless, which was about a jewel thief getting back with his ex-girlfriend. And then I did Dishonorable Vendetta and its sequel, Vendetta Games, which deal with these two drug enforcement agents, kind of along the lines of Miami Vice and Lethal Weapon. So I did like a lot of like, entertaining kind of Hollywood level type of projects
Yeah.
before I started doing more like personal, simplistic things that people could relate to.
So what's fair to say that this script and this film itself is different. Like this is very personal for you. This is how did you separate the storytelling element from like the person like because sometimes you get so close to the story that you kind of lose perspective.
That's a very good question. You know, part of the research into going into the script wasn't just full out, let me go beat for beat of everything that happened with me.
Yeah.
I spoke to other students that I went to school with to get their perspectives on things and learned about their stories that I never knew about. And, at the end credits, when you see like the news clippings of similar incidents that have gone on in the last couple of years, I really looked into those to see, what exactly went down with these kids? Why were they bullied? And the fact that the schools barely did next to nothing to address those matters, that their parents had to go to police or go to the media. So I felt it was a responsibility to try to tell that story in a truthful manner where, yes, my story is the example of this type of epidemic, but I look at it from those other angles as well to say, well, this is not the only situation where this is, realistic.
So exactly one like so let's talk about like the script itself then. It's 30 minutes long. It's pretty long short. Were you always was it always going to be a short film or is there a longer story here? I'm just curious like what was it always going to be a 30-minute short film or was it did you think about a feature film like 'cause you said you've done features in the past?
So I did think about it as a feature at one point, and I just felt for the purpose of time and obviously economics, it was just better to do it as a short where it would be easier to kind of program into festivals and just really just hit to the main points. But I do intend at some point in the future either to do this as a feature or maybe even as a series because there is a little bit more than what I was able to provide in those 30 minutes to get more into like the backstories of the characters and other things that were going on during that time that kind of led up to that incident.
So in the script itself, the female teacher that kind of advocates for this character, kind of like a mentor in a sense, where she sees the the bureaucracy and the underlying racism. I would that my words, not yours. That I would say in the script of these characters. Um, was this a real character of yours? Did you have someone like that in when you were going through the situation in high school?
Well, the teacher was really a composite of a number of teachers that I had over the years that I found to be the most inspiring. Unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't any like one specific teacher that stood up for me. There may have been some who've been interviewed that said, "Oh yeah, he's a good kid. He
Yeah.
doesn't exhibit that kind of behavior." But I really borrowed mostly from my history teacher in eighth grade, who was, kind of very stoic and tough around the kids. But then she'd have those moments of humility when, like, the lunchroom scene in particular was based on something that really happened to me, and there was a situation where I was sitting alone and the teacher actually sat right next to me, didn't say anything, just, we just started having lunch together, and I felt like I wasn't alone in that moment. So there was that. And then also my vice principal in the public school that I ultimately graduated from, she stood up for me a few times, especially one particular incident where I got racially profiled by the police. And this is not in the movie, by the way, but it was a particular thing that happened to me coming to school.
Mhm.
And, she heard about it and she actually did stand up for me in that moment. So I wanted to actually bring that personality into this character.
So you graduated from, did you graduate, you ended up graduating from like public high school, but did you go to private school yourself?
I went to a Catholic school from fifth grade to eighth grade. And then when I went to high school, I went to another Catholic school
Okay.
where this incident took place. And I was only there for about a year.
Gotcha. So like uniforms and
Yeah.
yeah. Well, there's a debate that like besides the religious ideology that Catholic schools are the most structured, um, well balanced schools in the United States. Like from a basically kids do well from an average standpoint at Catholic school. So I don't know. Was that your motivation going there? Or?
Well, I went because it was co-ed, and also they had a really good performing arts program, which is what attracted me to go. Um, I do agree that, yeah, when I was there, there was like this kind of structure where, you know, even the principal himself wouldn't let kids leave unless like the floors were clean. Like he basically ruled with an iron fist, similar to the principal in the movie.
Yeah,
And there was the sense of like they were preaching, get good grades and you'll get ahead in life. And when you walk out the door and you go on the bus, I'm not on the school, but like a public transportation bus, you start to see a bit of the real world and realize, yes, the education is very important, but there's a lot of the life lessons that I just feel Catholic schools lack in terms of
yeah.
teaching students. And then you end up having your head kind of in the clouds to the point where you're not really fully prepared for what's coming after the fact.
Gotcha. It's sort of like one of those inspirational posters where it says, "Work hard and get good grades, and life will take care of itself. You're going to do well." Like it's like a kind of like a black and white look at at life. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
not that simple.
there's nuance in life, right? So, okay, so tell me about okay, so you wrote the script. Tell me about the next steps. So basically, like there's two key things I want to ask you about. One, the locations, but you have to be at a school or something that looks like a school. And then two, your casting. So basically you like your main lead, especially who looks a lot like you. He has the same kind of tone as you do. In terms of like let's talk about the casting in terms of like you this is the most important thing you need to have cast this kid right because he's your story. If it doesn't work out then the movie doesn't work out. So tell me where you found him.
So Oliver Feaster, I found him on Backstage, and yeah, that was not an easy role to cast because there were a lot of actors who read for the TK role, and many of them were very good. But I was looking for somebody like myself who's very middle of the road, feels like they could be completely out of place, even if they're the most well behaved and don't come off like a stereotype. There's still that discrimination and singling that person out. And I just think, like with Oliver, he read the scene with the guidance counselor where he's professing his innocence. And I could just see it in the eyes with him that I could feel for this kid. I could feel like I'm sitting there and I want to like hug this kid and, really tell him it's going to be okay. And Oliver really captured that. I mean, we had some talks and, he's kind of a guarded person like myself, which I actually do appreciate. And I think that's what made it work so well because I'm a very private person. I'm not always putting out my personal life out there, but with
Yeah.
him, he was able to kind of like communicate that without saying too much. You know, that those awkward kind of looks with the Candace girl, or you know, the interactions with Miss Vance,
Yeah.
things really came off natural for him that I didn't really have to give him a whole lot of direction. I think he just nailed it.
So in terms of like he's giving the subtext of the story, right? Like he's feeling something. You don't got to tell us like through dialogue or through actions that this what this character's feeling. It's on his face. Like basically it's we see what's going on. We see, and of course everybody's from a different everybody's watching the films from a different lens, right? So obviously I'm watching this film from, from a middle class white guy's perspective who tries to think he's evolved. Perhaps I'm not, but I try my best. And then also another person who basically maybe is a black teenager who watches your film and sees probably like so much more, right? They see, yeah, I totally get what this guy's going through.
Yeah, you know, just the
Yeah.
idea of you're in this safe space in a school that seems to be well structured. Everybody comes from well-to-do families, and you know, again, preaching the importance of education. But when this sort of thing goes on, you know, it's like, well, we're too embarrassed to touch this thing, or we're looking for a reason to maybe say, well, there's something suspect about this kid, and maybe we don't need him. We need somebody else that fits our quota. So, that kind of got lifted from teachers I spoke to who've talked about similar situations, like in the conference room scene at the end, where they've had to face those kind of politics with the administration.
And like the casting of the teachers and the higher ups are it's fantastic. They like they're like what did they like it's just perfect casting for them. Like the bald like white guy or the gray white guy, and it's like even the teacher though she looks like a teacher, but there's a little bit that's something I don't know what it is. It's just like there's a little bit that the way you did her makeup or the way you did her hair, that's like she's a little bit of a rebel, but she's trying to stay in the structure because it's her job too, right? She doesn't want to lose her job, but she still wants to do the right thing. It's that balance, I guess, right?
Yeah, I got to give credit to Polly Matthias for the makeup. She did an amazing job here and works very fast, so I highly recommend her. But yeah, Lisa Regina was the first person I cast in this movie because I had worked with her on my first movie, Priceless, and she was also my acting coach for a time. So I used to do private coaching with her, and I think I learned more from her about acting than anywhere else that I've ever been to school with. And what I felt was she was the closest in terms of the teachers that I remember growing up that actually did stand up for me. And so, between that and the fact that she is an advocate in real life for anti-bullying and domestic violence, I felt she was the right person to almost be like the audience's perspective in the
Yeah.
way of seeing all this injustice take place and kind of taking a stand against it. So that's why we give her a little bit of a saltiness, make her a little bit, very Eastwood-esque, I would say, in terms of dealing with the administration and realizing that this is a good kid from a good stock of family, and they're not doing right by him. And when she gets down to the bottom of the truth, all of a sudden the bullying kind of takes a different turn. And
Yeah.
now it's against her for trying to do the right thing, which tends to happen more often than people imagine in schools across America. So we were communicating those things through her performance. And, I'm grateful for her because she was actually a good part responsible for some of the locations and some of the actors that we cast as
Oh
this new
wow.
administration.
So basically, yeah, you're right. Because from a directorial standpoint, a lot of the her scenes are told from her point of view. Like you're showing like this is what she sees, right? So yeah, it's interesting. And let's like take it one step back for a second because your main character, which is interesting because you kind of like start the movie with him and then you kind of go into her story for a bit for like 5-10 minutes, maybe like the 8-9 minutes probably. And then you kind of come back. It's kind of an interesting storytelling element where generally speaking, you go from a short film, you're always from his point of view, the guy's point of view. You kind of veer main characters for a bit. Did anybody talk to you about that when you're film? I'm just curious because it's like it works, but it's kind of a gutsy choice to make from storytelling elements.
No, that was always the intention, was to show the lead up to the incident, and then ultimately for this kid to really reach this boiling point. And obviously, I didn't want to end it there. I wanted to see the teacher, kind of like, I took a lot of inspiration from like a lot of 70s political thriller type of movies, like All the President's Men and The Parallax View, like all these movies with the paranoia elements. And so that's why it's got like that kind of intensity later on. It's like she's trying to get to the bottom of this, and there are those certain forces that don't want her to bring out the truth. So I was very interested in tackling it almost like a 70s political thriller.
That's an interesting point. That's an interesting take that you made. Even the way it's shot, it's kind of has that kind of, I don't want to call grainy, but it has that kind of interesting kind of like cinematic kind of flair to it. It's not bright, like especially when you're shooting in a school, right? Where it's all fluorescent lights, everything's kind of bright and kind of gray. It kind of it's a contradict. Schools are always contradictions, right? In terms of it's like art direction and lighting. But yeah, so did you talk to your cinematographer about that? Like about like kind of like having that kind of like what did you do to like kind of make it a little bit more grainy?
Oh, so that was something that was always planned. Myself and Greg Lassick, who was my cinematographer, we basically had discussed how I didn't want this movie to look nice and pretty. I wanted it to be dark and capture the feeling that I felt at that time.
Yeah,
And a lot of where my perspective was at was kind of this dark blue kind of look. And I remember, of all things, because I get inspiration all over the place, was if you ever saw the entire Michael Jackson Bad video, I'm not talking about like the actual musical number,
yeah,
but the scenes leading up to it, showing him coming out of prep school and he's getting kind of Wesley Snipes is trying to pull him back into his gang and stuff. There's like this kind of bluish tint to it that Martin Scorsese, who directed that video, he put in there to distinguish it from the part when Michael actually blows up. So I wanted to kind of recapture that feeling, that sort of like a little bit the saturation and give it this cold atmosphere in what's supposed to be a safe environment.
yeah.
And what we did was Greg was really good where I was always looking at the monitor attached to his Sony camera, and he would have the LUT filter put over it. So anytime we filmed, he was always shooting in color, but he would show me how this this LUT would look once we put it into post production. So we're always making sure like the brightness and contrast were correct with each scene.
Gotcha. And then the location obviously is key, like the school location and like even getting the background for the kids, right? Kind of giving it that realistic feel. Because if it doesn't look realistic, then the audience just kind of loses their their viewpoint of the film. So what did you made it? It's like was did you shoot in an actual school?
It was tricky because at first we did try to get an actual school, and it was still when COVID was going on, and trying to find a school where it was still closed and we would probably shoot on a weekend. We had one school in mind, it didn't quite work out. So what we did was we had to split it into multiple locations. And actually, the actress Denise, who plays TK's mother in the scene with the principal, she had a good connection with Lovett Hines, who ran the Clef School in Philadelphia, or the Clef Club, which is a jazz school. And they had classrooms on the top floor that were unoccupied, but had the tables, that had the blackboard and stuff. So we used that classroom and the hallway for basically the main parts of the school scenes. Then the cafeteria, we rented out this technology park in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and we got that while that place was closed and used their whole cafeteria setup for the lunchroom. And for all like the offices, like the principal's office and the conference room, Lisa's husband actually works as an accountant, and he has a private office in South Jersey. And we were able to get that on a weekend where we cleared out his space, turned it into the principal's office. And then it was tough with the conference room because it was supposed to be a lot bigger. But what we did was we just took this round table, we got every chair that we could get and put it into this little tight space. And Greg, with the lenses, was able to make it look a lot bigger than it really was. So that basically it was like three locations for one whole school.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. I just want to bring up your because you do kind of switch main characters, which really works. But she is fantastic, and so she is an acting teacher by trade, right? And she also does a lot of acting. It's funny because we got the poster there. She was on in Sopranos, right?
Yeah, yeah, she
Yeah.
was one of I forget what role she played, but yeah, she had a role on the series in the early seasons.
It's funny because I worked on it with an actress named Ginger Kearns. I'm throwing her out there. She was in the same episode of The Sopranos as she was.
Oh wow, okay.
Season 5, episode 1. What are the odds, right? So it's just kind of
Yeah.
funny story that basically, I guess that was a magical episode to work on.
Yeah, must have been. Even one of my first actors I ever worked with played he played a bully kid in the last season of The Sopranos, and he ended up in my first movie.
Yeah. So basically, like, so it is gutsy because it's like you basically kind of switching the roles there, but she's so great in the film where like it's she just takes the ball by the horn. So how did you like said she what did when do you remember when you first like gave her the script, said I want you to play this role? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I had sent it to her and I told her, I want to make this in the next couple of months. And she happened to be available, because she has her own projects going on too. And so I wanted to make sure it was in a block of time that was available and, co-partner with her company, Right to Heal, which is a nonprofit organization that deals with those very issues of anti-bullying and domestic violence survivors. So yeah, she read it, she translated it as something that she could easily relate to herself. And and we really went through, making sure like I wasn't going to always dictate her performance. I wanted to let her breathe and kind of like go with her own instincts on things. And then maybe there would be times where I'd say, well, this is a scene I really need you to nail. And especially towards the end with the conference room scene. I mean, I knew I couldn't get a million takes out of her with that because she was going to bring it in the first two. And then I was going to be like, okay, well, let's now go to the wides. And, then you could kind of like just play it down a little bit. But yeah, no, she really was somebody that I knew from day one was going to make this work as a whole because she could bring the best out of anybody that she works with, both in front of the camera and off the camera.
So what you do like from it's an interesting film, meaning that like you establish the character and then he there like obviously you show that he's talented, you show that he's a unique kind of guy very quickly, like within 5 minutes, where like he's an artist, he's got a high emotional intelligence, he understands like perspective. So you're showing this very talented individual, and then just because like it's kind of silly, but just because the pigmentation of his skin, it's pretty obvious that he's going through what he's going through, which makes no sense, like from a logical perspective, right? For any perspective. But that's sort of what you're showing. You're showing this like this above average person who just basically, likes a girl, right? And then this whole kind of craziness in like wait, it's a waste of time, basically. It's a waste of a lot of people's time and energy. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just how it shows you how ridiculous things are. You know what I mean? But it's obviously sad to say it's still like that. Like you said, you got inspired by obviously by what happened in 2020 with we don't have to get into it, but we know what happened, right? So basically that's you showing how silly everything is. That's basically what I'm watching the film. It's like this is the time that people are spending for this ridiculous conversation. It's like just ridiculous conversations that are happening in the film.
Yeah,
And you make your point, right?
yeah, the kids, especially at that time, it's like unless you were an athlete or you were like superbly talented in performing arts, if you were somebody that was of a
AKA
certain,
you're making money for the school. If you're making money
yeah,
for the school, right?
that
Let's
that's
call it what it is, right?
that's exactly what it is. It's just being like, okay, well, we have a diversity quota. We have, black people, Jewish people, Asian people, and we recognize everybody. But when something goes wrong, you're dispensable, and we could just get somebody else to fulfill that quota. So that's basically the way that they see it. They're not fighting for this kid. They just simply want to make sure their reputation is unharmed.
Yeah. And this kid makes them uncomfortable. Let's call it what it is, right? So
Yeah, it doesn't matter if where his neighborhood is or who his parents are. It's like, oh well, he doesn't really interact with the other kids so much, and he's not an athlete, he's not a singer. So if he's something different, we're afraid of that, and that happens more often, not just in schools, but in work environments all the time.
yeah, it's you making a dichotomy. You're very good at like promoting this film. Like you're all like you're basically you do like interviews, or we're talking right now, but I think you really like what is where do you want this film to go? Like what's the future for it? Like do you want to get a distribution somewhere, or do you want just to put it online and like get everybody to watch it for free? Like what's your plan?
That's a very good question. So one of the things I'm doing now is I'm trying to get this movie screened in schools. And so I'm
Yeah.
working with a business coach related to my college who is actually helping me put together a program that will use this movie as part of an advocacy program to go to schools, present the film, and just engage a conversation of what we could do better in terms of social responsibility in high schools when it comes to these type of bullying incidents that happen and go unreported. And like I said, at some point, one of the things I want to do is I want to write a novella to expand the story more and to get more to the backstories of the characters and some of the other things I left out because of the length of the script. And then at some point, maybe a feature film, maybe a series, try to like get maybe some name producer involved that could help me to get it into a larger narrative. And yeah, and then hopefully this movie can live on through that, whether I put it online or if I could get some kind of a deal that doesn't affect, like I use SAG, so there's certain limitations there,
Mhm.
but just basically I want to keep this thing going as a movement beyond just the film itself. This is something I really believe is something that truly hits my soul, that I feel like I can't just have it end with the festivals. I want to go further with it.
So yeah, well, it can easily be a feature because really she's the main character in this film, where like it's really her story, right? So, and basically, if it's a longer version, you can kind of to show well, both perspectives. Like you can show what he's going through while she's going through this nonsense with the administration, right? So it's so there's a nice parallel story because you do always need an advocate, right? So and you made the white person the hero. Was that done on purpose?
No, that was always by design because I mean,
Yeah,
listen, I grew up in a very diverse environment, and not everybody, because there a certain skin color, is supposed to fit one thing or another. And a lot of my mentors happen to be white, and I have some black mentors who are black. But in these particular cases where somebody actually did stand up to me, it would be like a white female that really saw my potential.
gotcha. And yeah, like I said, it's doing well. Well, what did you think about we send the audience to you, the audience feedback? What did you think what they had to say about your film?
I think it was all generally on point with the just feeling the story, feeling the characters, the aesthetics that we presented. I mean, there's some things that I would probably, address in terms of some of the criticisms, but they were valid. Nothing really like me upset. I'm always down for, when it's constructive and not toxic and mean spirited.
Yeah.
And there's things, yeah, I would definitely go back and fix, or things I might trim up just a little bit. But generally, it's my most proud work to this point because wherever I've gone to screen this, there's always a reaction. There's always people coming up to me telling me their stories and how this affected them, flashbacks that they had. So I feel like I did my job in that regard and really presenting the story. And really, just for myself, it was just a healing experience to kind of tackle this and, make my voice heard for the first time in a long time.
You're very good at doing the interviews with the press, and you basically, but you're in one of your underlying thematics in the film is that the press is there. Like it's like the kind of press helps out this character in a way, right? Like even the way you do the credits, right? Like you're showing the news stories about about all these victims. And so like I know it's not a black and white thing, but it seems like you believe in the value of the press in this first like free society I guess we live in.
I believe in the value of the press when they tell the truth, because
Yeah,
I think,
that's the danger now, right?
yeah,
So
one too often now, I mean, because you have so much misinformation out there, you could have somebody tell one story that ends up not being the entire facts, but you go with it because it sells and you never see the other perspective. And then we actually do see that perspective, it's eye-opening. So I wanted to actually not portray the press as the enemy of the people, as they say, but to show what good journalism can do to bring light to
yeah,
darkness.
yeah, I'm not, yeah, I think that the enemy either, yeah, as they say, I think the one particular guy found that catchphrase and kind of like ran with it for his own benefit, right? So, but I don't think, like I said, like the press, it's definitely flawed. because right now it's a for-profit business, right? Where like CNN or even, New York Times, whatever, it's just like they're there for to make money, right? That's the thing, right? So then before, back in the day, before they news stations would lose money on purpose because they wanted to tell the story, right? So now it's about sex. It's like it's whatever sexy is, that's what they're going to show because they have to make money. So then sometimes all these stories get lost in the shuffle, right? So
Yeah,
that,
and,
that's
and that
that's
was
the new world that we live in now.
my thing too, was that, especially those stories that you see at the end, most of those came from local news
Yeah,
stories in those states.
yeah.
These are not the things you see on CNN or MSNBC. Only when it's like really salacious or huge do they mention this. And listen, I know now there's a lot going on. We're in election year, and some of these issues we bring up may not be the most trendy right now, but they're still very universal, and they still need to be heard, because ultimately, even with what we've had in the last couple of years, this stuff still goes on every day and we just don't hear about it. So I feel like I have to put my voice out there to kind of keep that message going.
Yeah, the power of the local news station. I interviewed these guys. One of the guys is a lead anchor in Texas, and very red state. And basically, but like he basically says in these news stories, like it's not political. We're just showing what's going on in the community, right? And it could be whatever. He did a film about a trans person, and it's like it wasn't about left or right. It was just about this is the story that we were told, and it became a movie. And it's like, yeah, it goes. There's the power of the local news station, but the problem now is that everything's online, so people are not watching cable news, right? So it's like we gotta. He was just talking about like how do we get the local news out to people who live in the area when in this new world that we live in, right? So
It's not getting any easier. That's
yeah,
what I know. But I mean, there are some hard journalists that are out there in social media. And if you vet them, and if they're going beyond what the mainstream media talks about, there's some gems. There's a lot of misinformation and garbage out there too, but you got to separate the two.
yeah. Well, that's the art, right? So maybe, yeah. So it's an interesting time. So we're doing this. We did this in February. Sorry, March 25th, 2024. Got a crazy year ahead of us. Hopefully everything goes out well. Great film. There's a lot of really interesting directorial elements that you did in this film that were gutsy, and even from, like I said, from a storytelling standpoint, where he's the lead and then you switch over, and then also like the way it's shot. So like fantastic job. So hopefully that, like I said, it will get in schools and like it will do what you want, and hopefully you keep making movies like this. I think that these kind of like heavy personal movies, I think this is your wheelhouse. I hope you keep make more of them.
Oh yeah, no, there's a lot more to come from us.
Yeah, I see that. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for your time. Let's talk again when you make your next film.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks.